If you had $10,000 sitting in a savings account in the year 2000, that money can only buy you about $5,800 worth of stuff today. You didn't spend a dime. You didn't get scammed. You didn't make a single bad investment. You just did nothing. And doing nothing cost you $4,200. That's the real price of playing it safe. And almost nobody talks about it like this. So let me rewind and show you exactly how inflation is picking your pocket right now. And more importantly, what you can actually do to fight back. Hey, I'm Joe, and this is Joe Invests. This is the channel where we break down money topics that actually affect your life. No confusing jargon, no Wall Street gatekeeping, just real talk about building wealth the smart way. And today we're going deep on inflation, not the boring textbook version, but the version that's quietly making you poorer every single year, even if your bank account number stays the same. If you get value from this, drop a like. It genuinely helps more people find this channel. And let's get into it. Okay, so let's start with what's actually happening to your money right now with some real numbers. The Bureau of Labor Statistics tracks something called the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, which measures how much everyday stuff costs over time. According to their data, the cumulative inflation rate from January 2000 to January 2024 is about 72%. That means something that cost $100 in 2000 now costs roughly $172. Same exact thing, same box of cereal, same oil change, same rent check, just 72% more expensive. Now here's where it gets personal. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York found that the median savings account balance for American households is around $5,300. If that money just sat in a typical savings account earning around 0.5% interest for the last decade, you lost roughly 25% of its purchasing power after accounting for inflation. That's over $1,300 in real value, gone. And it's not just savings accounts. A study published by the National Bureau of Economic Research in 2021 found that roughly 40% of American adults hold the majority of their wealth in cash or cash equivalents. That means almost half the country's wealth is actively shrinking in real terms every single year. Let me give you a grocery store example because this one really hits home. According to the USDA, the average cost of groceries for a family of 4 was about $568 per month in 2002. By 2023, that same basket of groceries cost over $1,053 per month. That is an 85% increase. Your family isn't eating more food. You're just paying almost double for the same meals. And wages? Yeah, wages have technically gone up. The Economic Policy Institute found that from 1979 to 2022, productivity in America grew by almost 65%. But typical worker compensation only grew by about 15% after adjusting for inflation. So the economy is producing way more, but workers are capturing almost none of those gains in real purchasing power. Here's one more stat that should make your stomach turn. Research from economists at the University of Michigan found that a dollar earned in 1970 has the same purchasing power as about $7.96 today. So if your grandparents buried $1,000 in the backyard in 1970, and you dug it up tomorrow, it would only buy you about $126 worth of stuff in their terms. That's not a slow leak. That is a wealth destruction machine operating quietly in the background of your entire financial life. So now you understand the problem. But let's talk about why this happens. And more importantly, why your brain is wired to completely ignore it. Inflation exists for a few reasons, but the most fundamental one is monetary policy. When the Federal Reserve increases the money supply, which it does regularly, more dollars chase the same amount of goods and services. Basic supply and demand, more dollars, same stuff, prices go up. Between February 2020 and December 2021 alone, the M2 money supply, which tracks cash, checking deposits, and easily convertible near money, increased by roughly 40%. Economist Milton Friedman famously said, "Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon." He won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1976 and spent decades proving that point. But here's where it gets psychologically fascinating. There's a concept called money illusion, first described by economist Irving Fisher in 1928, and later studied extensively by behavioral economists Eldar Shafir, Peter Diamond, and Amos Tversky. Money illusion is the tendency for people to think about money in nominal terms, the number on the bill, rather than real terms, what that number can actually buy. So when your boss gives you a 3% raise, you feel richer. Your brain says more money equals better. But if inflation that year was 4%, you actually took a pay cut. You're earning more dollars that buy less stuff. Shafir, Diamond, and Tversky published a landmark paper in 1997 in the Quarterly Journal of Economics showing that people consistently fail to account for inflation when evaluating wages, prices, and contracts. We are psychologically blind to it. There's another mechanism at play here called the boiling frog effect. Inflation doesn't show up at your door and announce itself. It creeps. 2% here, 3% there. Economist Robert Shiller from Yale, another Nobel laureate, has written extensively about how humans struggle to perceive slow-moving economic changes. In his book, Irrational Exuberance, he explains that people anchor to recent prices and fail to see long-term trends. You don't notice that your coffee went from $1.50 to $2 to $3 to $5.50 over 20 years. Each individual increase feels small, but the cumulative effect is devastating. And there's a third mechanism that makes this even worse, something economists call the inflation tax. This was studied in depth by researchers at the International Monetary Fund. When governments run deficits and central banks expand the money supply to cover them, it effectively transfers wealth from savers to borrowers. If you're holding cash, you're losing. If you hold debt that gets repaid in cheaper future dollars, you're winning. This is why the US government, which carries over $34 trillion in national debt, actually benefits from inflation. Every inflated dollar makes that debt easier to repay. Meanwhile, your savings account is subsidizing that process. Economist Thomas Piketty discussed this dynamic extensively in his 2014 book, Capital in the 21st Century, arguing that when the return on capital exceeds the rate of economic growth, wealth concentrates at the top, and inflation accelerates that gap for those who don't own productive assets. So let's recap the triple threat. 1. The money supply keeps expanding, diluting the value of every dollar you hold. 2. Your brain is wired to ignore it because of money illusion. And 3. The system is actually designed to benefit from your inaction. The game is rigged against people who just save in cash. Which brings us to what you can actually do about it. All right, here's where we flip the script. You can't stop inflation, but you can absolutely position your money so it grows faster than inflation eats it. Strategy number 1, and this is the most important one, invest in broad market index funds. I know it sounds basic, but the data is overwhelming. According to research from NYU Stern School of Business professor Aswath Damodaran, the S&P 500 has returned an average of about 10.1% per year since 1928. After adjusting for inflation, that's still roughly 7% real returns per year. Let me put that in real numbers. If you invested $500 a month into a total stock market index fund starting in 2004, 20 years ago, at the historical average return, you'd have roughly $343,000 today. Your total contributions would have been $120,000. That means over $223,000 came from growth that dramatically outpaced inflation. Compare that to putting the same $500 a month in a savings account at 1% interest. You'd have about $133,000, and after inflation, the real value of that money would be closer to $95,000. The difference between investing and saving over 20 years is nearly $250,000. Strategy number 2, own real assets. Real estate, for example, has historically been an excellent inflation hedge. The Case-Shiller Home Price Index shows that U.S. home prices have appreciated at roughly 3.8% per year since 1987, basically tracking or slightly beating inflation. But when you factor in that most people buy real estate with a mortgage, using leverage, the returns on your actual cash invested are significantly higher. Let's say you put $40,000 down on a $200,000 house 10 years ago. That house might be worth $330,000 today. Your $40,000 investment turned into $170,000 in equity, a 325% return, all while inflation only totaled about 31% over that same period. Now, I'm not saying everyone should rush out and buy property, but the principle matters. Assets that produce income or appreciate with inflation protect your wealth. Cash does not. Strategy number 3, Treasury inflation protected securities, also known as TIPS. These are government bonds where the principal adjusts with the CPI. So if inflation goes up 4%, your bond's value goes up 4%. They won't make you rich, but they're a great place to park money you might need in 2 to 5 years that you want to protect from inflation without taking stock market risk. Strategy number 4, and this one is often overlooked: invest in yourself. Your earning power is your single biggest financial asset. A Georgetown University study from 2021 found that over a lifetime, a bachelor's degree holder earns about $2.8 million on average, compared to $1.6 million for someone with only a high school diploma. That's a $1.2 million difference. But it doesn't have to be a college degree. Learning a high-income skill, getting a certification, starting a side business, these all increase your income. And here's the key: your income can grow faster than inflation if you're strategic about it. Inflation averages 2 to 3% per year, but a career change or new skill can boost your income by 20, 30, even 50% in a single year. Strategy number 5, keep only 3 to 6 months of expenses in cash. This is your emergency fund, and it should stay liquid. But everything beyond that should be working for you in some form of investment. A Bankrate survey from 2023 found that 62% of Americans have more cash savings than invested assets. For most of those people, that ratio should be flipped. Let me paint a picture. Imagine you're 30 years old. You keep $8,000 as your emergency fund in a high-yield savings account earning around 5% right now. Everything else, your retirement contributions, your brokerage account, your Roth IRA, goes into a diversified mix of index funds. You contribute $600 a month total. By the time you're 60, even using conservative estimates of 7% average annual returns, you'd have roughly $719,000. After adjusting for inflation at an average of 3%, that's still about $335,000 in today's purchasing power. If you'd kept that same $600 a month in a savings account, you'd have about $216,000 in nominal terms, but only about $101,000 in today's dollars. The invested version of you is 3 times richer in real terms. Same income, same monthly contribution. Just a different decision about where the money sits. Let me bring this all together because I want these numbers to stick with you. In Act 1, we saw the raw damage. Inflation has eroded roughly 72% of the dollar's purchasing power since the year 2000. Groceries nearly doubled. Wages didn't keep up. 40% of Americans hold most of their wealth in cash, which means 40% of Americans are losing money every single year without realizing it. In Act 2, we learned why this is so dangerous. It's not just an economic force, it's a psychological trap. Money illusion makes you think your raise means you're richer. The boiling frog effect hides 20 years of price increases behind tiny incremental changes. And the system itself, the inflation tax, is quietly transferring wealth from people who save in cash to those who own assets and hold debt. And in Act 3, we built the playbook. Broad market index funds that have averaged 7% real returns for nearly a century, real assets like property that appreciate with inflation, TIPS for shorter-term protection, investing in your own skills and earning power, and the discipline to keep only what you need in cash and put the rest to work. Here's what I want you to take away from this more than anything. Inflation is not some abstract economic concept that only matters to policy nerds. It is the single biggest silent threat to your financial future. And the difference between understanding it and ignoring it over a 30-year career is literally hundreds of thousands of dollars. You don't need to be a stock picker. You don't need to time the market. You don't need a finance degree. You just need to understand one simple truth. Money that sits still is money that moves backward. The moment you accept that, everything changes. You stop seeing investing as risky, and start seeing not investing as the real risk. If this video opened your eyes even a little bit, smash that subscribe button. I'm Joe. This is Joe Invests, and I make videos like this every week to help you build wealth without the BS. I'll see you in the next one.